Hello friends, good morning and welcome to the EduSat Network. Friends, as you know, we have been running this series on Hindi cinema. We had lectures last month talking about Hindi cinema and the theme of social reform. To continue that, today's topic will be Hindi cinema and globalization, which will be talked about today and even tomorrow. And for this discussion, we have with us in our studio the same subject expert, Dr. Manoj Sharma, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Kirodimal College, University of Delhi. Dr. Sharma's PhD is on neorealism in Indian cinema 1944 to 69, and friends, with his expertise and his experience and knowledge, he will be able to guide us better. So let us welcome sir and also request him to begin our today's lecture. Thank you so much, sir, for coming.
Thank you. A very good morning to all of you. Today's topic of our discussion is Hindi cinema and globalization. Hindi cinema, as we all of us know, is quite popular. It is not only popular in the northern part of India, where Hindi is largely spoken, but when we see the popularity of Hindi cinema in eastern part of India, southern part of India, where Hindi film song, they are quite liked by the audience. And not only in India, but across the world as well, when we see Southeast Asia, UK, then America, Indian diaspora, various people, those who are of Indian origin, they have liked Indian cinema and Hindi cinema as well. And that is why so many film stars like Amitabh Bachchan, Shah Rukh Khan, Salman, Katrina Kaif, Aishwarya, they have all been associated with various event shows which are organized live by various media organizations or event management companies. So these people, they are some sort of they are fondly remembered by Indian diaspora, and they are some sort of a rage in these countries. And how they have been able to propagate the themes which are there in the Indian cinema, the way the Indian cinema or Hindi cinema is being made largely in Bombay, the Hindi films which are made largely in Bombay, and how they are carried over from India to other parts of the world as well. And when we say or talk about globalization, globalization is a very broad term basically, and it covers so many things. But largely when we talk about globalization, we talk in the terms of 1991 and thereafter, when a number of economic reforms they came in India, and thereafter a number of changes were also witnessed in the Hindi film industry as well, in terms of production, distribution and the consumption of films. So when we talk about globalization largely in 1991 framework, but before that also we can say that a number of earlier films, they were being sent to different film festivals, and so from that perspective Indian films, they were going abroad earlier also. So the theme of our discussion is largely globalization in Hindi cinema, and the important issues which we will focus on in this context will be the popularity of the Hindi film songs in the Indian diaspora, and how the Hindi film songs, they are being shot on foreign locations. So how foreign locations like Switzerland, Austria, or in some parts of America, we see that how Indian Hindi films, they are being shot exclusively, and especially Hindi film songs which form important part of the Hindi films, they are being shot on the foreign locations. And we have seen that how many times some of the films which have very good music and songs, they have become quite popular with the Indian audience, like films like Hum Aapke Hain Kaun, which had around 9 to 10 songs, or the earlier other films of Rajshrees, which contained many songs, and how they have become quite popular with the Indian audience. And how Hindi cinema and globalization, they have interacted with each other. That when we see that Hindi films, they have been made, and how they are reaching to the audience across the world, and how the effect of globalization on Hindi cinema can be seen. So these are some of the issues on which we will focus today, and we would like to see that how the impact of globalization has been on the Hindi cinema. At the same time, before coming to 1990s, I would like to talk about the kind of beginnings which we had. Dr. Arup Ratan Ghosh, he argues that cinema from its birth or since its inception was global in nature. And when he says that it was global in nature, we can argue that Lumiere brothers, who are credited with the introduction of the cinematograph, a machine with which films were being made, and this was introduced in 1895, and after that in 1896 first films which were shot in nature, they were exhibited in India in 1896, I think on 7th July 1896 in the Kala Ghoda area in the Watson Hotel in Bombay. So when these films they were being shown in India, Times of India called them marvel of the century, and they really were the marvel of the century in the 20th century. So from that perspective, when we see that Lumiere brothers, they travelled across the world, and when they travelled across the world, they were being felicitated, they were being honoured across the world for such kind of an invention. And from that perspective, cinema or the cinematograph was a global thing since its beginnings, and how it overcome the boundaries of the nations from that perspective. Then from the Indian context, Dada Saheb Phalke, he made an important contribution to the Indian cinema. He is referred to as the father of Indian cinema, because the way he initiated his efforts, the kind of personal sacrifices he made so that he can make films in India was quite remarkable. And how the folk entertainment during that particular period, the themes of epics like Mahabharata and Ramayana, they were being borrowed, and how the Parsi theatre also influenced Indian cinema in the initial stages. At the same time, the impact of the American musicals in 1920s and 1930s cinema could also be seen. So till 1931 we have films which were silent, and after 1931, when the first talkie was made by the title of Alam Ara by Ardeshir Irani. So all these kind of things which we can see in Indian or Hindi cinema. What we see is that Dada Saheb Phalke, he went to Britain to polish his craft of filmmaking, and there he learnt some of the important techniques which were associated in terms of filmmaking. And another important contributor was Himanshu Roy, who is considered to be the first showman of Hindi cinema, and he was owner of Bombay Talkies also. Himanshu Roy into International, it collaborated with IBB of England, and they made a film Karma both in Hindi as well as English in 1933. So we see that this kind of collaboration was there in 1933 as well, that both Britain as well as India, they came together, and jointly two companies, they produced a film in both the languages. So this kind of collaboration makes that how films they became international in this context. And when we see that there was another film in 1936 with the title of Achut Kanya, which was directed by the German director Franz Osten. So some of the film technicians, those who were associated with Hindi cinema in 1930s as well, they were foreign. So, and some of the foreign stories, they were also being adapted to the Indian audience, so that Indian audience can also see those films. And at the same time, some of the foreign technicians as well, they were working for the Indian cinema as well. Some of the Indian films, they were being sent for the International Film Awards. Sant Tukaram was a film which was made in 1936. It was a Marathi film which was made by V. Damle and S. Fatehlal. And it was the first film which won an award at the Venice Film Festival. So Sant Tukaram, which was dealing with the life of a Maharashtrian saint with the title of Tukaram, and how this film became quite popular, though it was in Marathi, and it was also awarded at an international level. So what we see is that Indian cinema or Hindi cinema or cinema which was made during the earlier part, it was also trying to compete with the world cinema. Entries were being sent to the foreign countries, so that the audience at international level, they get acquainted with the Hindi films as well. Another important film which was awarded at the Cannes Film Festival was the Nicha Nagar, which was made in 1946, and this film was made by Chetan Anand, and this was the first film which was made by Chetan Anand, and it was talking about some sort of a class conflict which was going on in the Indian Indian society. And at the same time, another important film which we can talk about was Do Bigha Zameen. Do Bigha Zameen was made by Bimal Roy in 1953, and it was a special recipient. It was especially mentioned at the Cannes Film Festival, and it was also the winner of the Social Progress Award at Karlovy Vary. So what we see is that many of the films of 1940s and early 50s, they were being sent to the various international film festivals, they were winning awards also, and they were being discussed at international level also. With regard to Do Bigha Zameen, we have read a number of reviews by the foreign film critics that it was some sort of a front runner in terms of a neorealist classic. Neorealism was a movement which was initiated in Italy in 1940s and early 50s, and neorealism talked about certain features in the context that non-professional actors, they were being used in the neorealist films. Then they were not melodramatic in nature. The casting was generally non-professional. The actors, they were not the way they were being projected on the screen, they were keeping in the context of reality in nature, and at the same time the script was not all that melodramatic. Location shooting was an important consideration in that context, that they were trying not to shoot in the studios. Similarly, some of the Indian films, they also got influenced by the neorealist traits. Some of the films I have already mentioned, like Neecha Nagar, and another film was Dharti Ke Lal, which was made by K. Abbas in 1946 as well. So these films, they were, it was produced by IPTA, Indian People's Theatres Association. So these films, some of the films, those who were influenced with the ideals of neorealism, and later Indian cinema or Hindi cinema took its own direction in the context of neorealism. And some of these films, how they were contributing, how some of these films, they were being sent to the foreign film festivals, and how they received awards or they got a mention, how they were criticized or how they were being appreciated by the foreign critiques. In the context of such films, the name of Satyajit Rai is very, very important, because the films which he made, they bore the expressive image of the local, regional and the national India, and the microscopic details of the culture of West Bengal could be seen in many of the films of Satyajit Rai, how the villages and towns of Bengal, they were being exhibited and represented in his films, and how they could be seen in the progressive flux of globalization and cinema. And Satyajit Rai was one person who largely made Bengali films, and one of the Hindi films which was made by him was Shatranj Ke Khiladi with Amjad Khan and Sanjeev Kumar. And many of the films of Satyajit Rai, they were well received in the Western audience, and many of the films, they received awards at different levels. Apu trilogy, the three films which were made by Satyajit Rai, Pather Panchali, Aparajito and Apu Sansar, Apu's World, all these three films, they won awards at different levels. And Pather Panchali was a film which was made in 1955. It was his first film. It had mostly non-professional actors. The budget was very low because Satyajit Rai did not have enough money to finance this film, and for a particular period, for a year or so, the shooting was also stalled because Satyajit Rai sold the ornaments of his wife to finance the film, and even then he could not complete the film. And Chunni Bala Devi, one of the actresses who performed in the film, was more than 80 years old, and Satyajit Rai was quite worried that she might not die. He was quite worried because it would affect the continuity of the film as well. So, but Satyajit Rai was quite fortunate that film got finances from the government of the West Bengal. It was financed by the government of the West Bengal, and then it was made, and the rushes of the film were seen by some of the important film personalities of the Western world, and when they came to India. And when the film was sent across the world in different competitions, it was well received and it won a number of awards. And what we see is that even the name which was made by Satyajit Rai in terms of film production and film direction in India, he was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Oscars as well. So the awards to his films are not only testimony to the talent of Satyajit Rai, and awards cannot be the only some kind of testimony, but the kind of films which were being well received by the audience was one of the important awards which Roy or Satyajit Rai could achieve within the Indian audience. And his films, they were largely non-realist or largely neo-realist in the content as well as treatment. So from that perspective, Satyajit Rai films brought Indian cinema at the international level, or brought Indian cinema to the global audience was brought to the Indian cinema in this context. When we talk about Pather Panchali, it was made in 1955. It won awards in the International Human Document Prize in 1956 Cannes Film Festival. It was the best foreign film in 1958 National Board of Review. Apart from this, when we talk about Aparajito, it won the Golden Lion Award at the 1957 Venice Film Festival. Then Apur Sansar, the third film of Apur trilogy, which was made by Satyajit Ray, it won the Sutherland Trophy. And I have already mentioned that how Satyajit Rai, he won Lifetime Achievement Award for Oscars. This was the award which was given to him in 1991. So this was an important contribution which was made by him. When we talk about Hindi films, we say that India is one of the largest, not only one of the largest, India is the largest producer of films, because the films which are made in India, they are more than 1,000 in number. When we are talking about Indian films, we are talking about all the regional films which are made in India, apart from Hindi films, the films which are made in Tamil, the films which are made in Telugu, all these films, the various regional film industries of India, they produce more than 1,200 films a year. And Screen Australia magazine in 2010, it said that India is the world's largest producer of films. And India produced around 1288 films in 2009, which was around 24% of the films which are produced worldwide. So when you see that so many films which were being made in India in different languages in various parts of India, so how India is in a way crazy in that sense, or some kind of cinema as well as cricket in India, they have become opium of the masses, because cinema is one of the most important entertainments even now, that people, those who are going even to multiplexes or those who are going to malls, even malls they have multiplexes. So entertainment is combined in that way that the family holidays which are taken by the Indians on Sundays, that they go to a mall, they watch a film, they have a lunch or dinner, whatever, and this is how they entertain themselves. And similarly it is the case with cricket as well, that cricket is such a big, huge draw with the Indian spectators, that we are having such a huge league with the name of IPL, which is supported by Indians quite well. So in this context, when we see cinema, Hindi cinema, which is some sort of an opium of the masses, that how people, they are addicted to the Hindi films. So from that context, when we see that Indian film production is more than the films which are made in United States, Hollywood, which is considered to be some sort of a Mecca of the film fraternity of the world, because the kind of budget which the Hollywood films had, it was quite unthinkable for the Hindi films, because Hindi films quite recently, they were not made on that scale on which Hollywood films they were being made. The budget was comparatively quite small. But especially after globalization, the period of 1990s and thereafter, Indian films or Hindi films, they are made on a huge budget nowadays, and when foreign technicians, their help is even sought in the Hindi films. So from that perspective, we say that Indian cinema has come quite a long way. In 1991 was a year which was quite remarkable from economic point of view, as well as the changes which were brought to the Indian cinema industry as well, because India launched its important or ambitious economic liberalization program in 1991. A number of structural changes they were being introduced in the Indian economy, the various financial sectors, they underwent a number of changes during this period of 1991. And at the same time, satellite television was also introduced in this particular period. Before that, what we see is that Doordarshan was the channel which was the channel of the government. It was regulated by the Ministry, Information and Broadcasting Ministry regulated Doordarshan, which was a channel, and some of the metro channels, they were being introduced in the metro cities. But we did not have so many channels which came with the satellite television, with the cable industry, when you had around 70 channels which were introduced initially. Now with the coming of DTH, direct to home, so many other channels, more than 1,000 channels there we can see on the Indian television. So with this exposure to various channels in the 1990s, which were catering to various tastes, they were not only news channels, a number of channels were catering to the family audiences, a number of channels which were lifestyle channels, a number of channels which were dealing with specifically with films. Some of the channels, they were only showing films throughout the day and night. They were 24-hour channels, and on many of the channels, even where entertainment programs they were being made, these entertainment programs, they were based on films. So what we see is that they were some sort of a complementary phenomena in this context, and they became potent forces of globalization, because the kind of changes which came in the information technology with the arrival of satellite television, and later with internet, and how internet became popular. So with the coming of internet, with the coming of social media channels, with the coming of downloading of films in this context, that many of the films, they were being downloaded directly by the audience. There are so many sites which offer you these kind of services. So cinema became quite popular in this context. When we see the kind of changes which were brought by the liberalization of the Indian economy in the 1990s, in this way, that how the rising internationalization of the production, distribution and the consumption of Hindi films takes place. The way the films, they were being produced by earlier, there was a lot of talk that a lot of black money was there in the Indian films, because some of the channels which were dealing with the black money, they were shifting their finances to the film medium. This is what was allegedly argued, and cinema was not even recognized as an industry till 1987. So with the tag of an industry which was given to cinema in 1987 and thereafter, we see that when the cinema was given this status, cinema could have the finances from some of the institutions as well. Though cinema could not get the finances at the initial level, but a number of changes came in terms of production, a number of changes came in terms of distribution of films, as well as how the target audience of the films, they also got changed. As I talked about, with the arrival of DTH and with the arrival of internet and the other satellite channels, some kind of easy access to the Hindi films could be seen during this period, and not only Hindi cinema but the films of other regional languages, films of Hollywood, they could also be downloaded and could be seen by the Indian audience. And this kind of interest within the Indian audience in this regard could be seen, and it also defined the kind of changes which came for the audience as well. In 1990s, what we see is an important aspect in the context of the multiplexes which arrived. Multiplexes are the screens. In one cinema, there are a number of screens which we see. Largely in Delhi and other metros and other cities, we see that multiplexes, they have arrived. In one cinema hall, you have 3 to 4 screens in which at different times different films are shown. And earlier what we used to see was one cinema hall with one screen in which there were 1,000 seats. So the carrying capacity of 1,000 seats many times could not be fulfilled. and many times films with only 200 or 150, with that kind of audience film they were being shown. So from that perspective they were not economically viable. So when multiplexes came, what we see is that films could be economically viable, because the screens, the audience capacity in these auditoriums, many of them were 200 or 300, so they could be houseful as well. From that perspective, that show is houseful. And at the same time, the ticket rates they also increased manifold. Even now when you compare the ticket rates in a multiplex or in a conventional cinema hall which has a carrying capacity of 1,000 or more, we see they are just double. So from that perspective these kind of changes came. So the smaller auditorium, they gave a chance to the various films they could be exhibited, the small budget films which were made for specific targets, specific target audience, they were being made. And when these films they were being made for the target audience, special or accordingly themes they were also devised by the filmmakers, because now the filmmakers, they had this kind of luxury that they could experiment. They knew that they will make a investment of a particular amount and they will be able to recover that amount in time, because they were making that film for a target audience. Their aim was not to attract everybody, but their aim was to attract a specific kind of audience for which this kind of film they were being made. So there was greater flexibility in the multiplexes to mix and match shows, that 2 or 3 shows in a particular auditorium were for a particular film, and other shows they were being for some other film. The timing and the prices, they could also be tempered with, or they could also be adjusted. As we can see that on the weekdays generally the prices for the in the multiplexes for the exhibition of films is generally less, and when you go on the weekends, then the prices for the film or the film ticket is comparatively high. Many times they are double generally. Then in this way what we see is that many of the average films they are also able to achieve quite handsome profits, because the way they are being exhibited in the multiplexes. And in the similar context, in 1990s what we see is that the distinctions which were prevalent in the earlier times within the context of the commercial cinema and the art cinema, in 1980s what we see is that there was a parallel cinema or the art cinema, in which a number of films like Ardh Satya, Akrosh, Nishant, Ankur, all these films which were they were product of the Nouvelle Vague or the French New Wave. They were being made, and they were made for a particular audience, and these films, many a times most of these films they could not find the audience as well, because comparatively they were slow in treatment and in terms of nature as well, and the themes also many a times were not able to attract the audience which was looking for escapist fares. So from that perspective, in 1990s and thereafter, what we see is that many of the films which were being made during this particular period, they deal with such kind of treatment, they deal with those themes which are able to attract the masses as well as the classes, as the cliche goes, that many of the films they are being made for the masses, the local audience, the common audience, they are going to like it, or some of the films they are being made for the gentry or the classes. So from that perspective, this kind of distinction between the commercial cinema and the arts cinema was diminishing day by day in 1990s and thereafter in the first decade of the 21st century. So these were the changes which were coming in the Hindi cinema as well. When we talk about the kind of benefits which came with the multiplexes, we see that the smaller auditoriums gave a chance that these films they could be exhibited, and this was an important aspect. At the same time, new types of directors they were able to catch the attention of the spectators, because some of the films they were being made on number of serious issues, and these serious issues they were earlier not in that context reflected in the Hindi cinema. For example, Maqbool was a film which was made in 2003. It was an adaptation of a play Macbeth, adaptation of a play by Shakespeare. Onkar and Heather, which were made by Vishal Bharadwaj in different years. Onkar, for example, in 2006 and Heather in 2014. And A Wednesday, a film was made in 2008, and Special 26 in 2013 by Neeraj Pandey, who has recently made a film called Baby in 2015. It has been released recently in January. And another film called Page 3 in 2005, in Fashion 2008 by Madhur Bhandarkar. So what we see is that a number of new directors, those who were experimenting with new themes, those who were experimenting with new subject matter, their treatment was different in this context. Their budgets were not all that astronomical. The budgets, they had some kind of constraints, and they were working with new kind of actors. At the same time, they were not compromising on their content and theme. So these kind of films, they became reality in 2000 and thereafter. So in this context, this kind of changes which came in the content as well as the treatment of the films, because the target audience also changed. Now they were targeting an audience for which specifically they were making films. Earlier the target audience was the underprivileged people, those who were coming from the rural areas, and the films, they were being made for this kind of an audience because they had not seen that kind of opulence earlier. And when big budget films which were showing a lot of opulence, they were being exhibited in this kind of in these kind of films, and these the people, they got attracted to these films. And even the rural spectator, he was now more fascinated with those kind of films where sequences, they were being shot on the exotic foreign locations. So this kind of change in the content as well as the treatment could be seen in this particular period. And many of the films, I do not mean to say that in earlier period in 1960s, Indian films, they were being not shot in different locations of the world. We had a film called Love in Tokyo, which was shot in Tokyo, and in many of the films, An Evening in Paris, for example, many of the films, they were shot in different parts of the world, in Europe, etc. But they were limited in nature. Now many of the films which were made, even if film was not shot in other parts of the world, but their songs were, because songs, they formed an important ingredient of the film. So the songs, they were being shot on foreign locations, and they were being incorporated in Hindi films. Similarly, the introduction of the item songs recently was an important phenomena, especially in 2000 and thereafter, that how item songs, they became a rage in many of the films, though they do not have any kind of relation with the script of the films, but how they became an important aspect of films. Many of the script driven films like Filhal, which was made in 2001, then Swadesh, in which Shah Rukh Khan acted, which was made in 2004, it was also a script driven films. Then at the same time, Wake Up Sid, which was made in 2009. Wake Up Sid was largely appreciated by the target audience for which it was specifically made. Tare Zameen Par was a film in which Amir Khan, it is suggested that he was the one who directed this film, and Amir Khan also acted in this film, which was talking about a problem in children called dyslexia, and people became aware because of this film that these are the issues with which society or the children, they are afflicted. Then Do Duni Char, which was made in 2010, it shows that how a family is trying to go up the economic ladder and the kind of problems they have. So these kind of issues which were talked about. Another film with the title of A Wednesday, which was made by Neeraj Pandey, which was based on the theme of terrorism. Terrorism is an important issue or a burning issue in today's world, and how the common people, they are being afflicted with this kind of fear that terrorist activity, and we have seen quite often in India as well, because of so many bomb blasts, or there is a kind of fear psychosis during Republic Day, during any festival, that some mishappening or some bomb blast may not take place. So, Wednesday talks from a common man's perspective, that how an issue of terrorism is evident in the Indian society, and how it is affecting the common masses. Kahani was another important film which was a women-centric or woman-centric film which was made, and this film was very refreshing in nature in this context, that the treatment was very different, and it was a low budget film as well. Another film was Special 26, in which Akshay Kumar played the lead, and this film was also appreciated by the audience. And another film in 2015 with the Akshay Kumar in the lead with the title of Baby, which is also talking about the unsung heroes, those who are contributing to make the lives of the people quite peaceful, the people those who are guarding the nation in that sense, that the people those who are associated with the intelligence agencies, people those who are associated with police, the people those who are associated with the army, and how they are giving or doing their bit so that other people they can have a peaceful life. So these kind of issues, they are quite relevant in today's context. Another important film is Three Idiots. Three Idiots was a content driven film which was talking about the education system, that how we should not focus, or how we should not ask the students to compete in terms of getting more and more marks, how the focus should not be on the rote learning, rather innovation in terms of teaching, rather innovation in the term that how people what they want to pursue in their life. They should have their own ambitions in life, and if they are able to excel in they will only be able to excel in what they are doing in their life if they are doing that thing which they desire to do. So the desire or the kind of the drive to do a particular or to excel in a particular profession is associated with excellence in this film, and it was very well received with the Indian audience, and it was quite often talked about even in the training programs in IIM Ahmedabad and other educational institutions. So when we talk about the kind of reasons for change, we say that these reasons came because of the globalization of the Indian economy in 1991, then the liberalization and the privatization of the economy, because of which a number of changes which occurred in the structure of the Indian economy, which made these kind of changes possible also. At the same time, we can say that the changing social and the cultural values of the Indian masses or the Indian people, when many foreign national companies, many MNCs, multinational corporations or transnational corporations, they came to India, and Indians, they got absorbed in all these multinational corporations. The kind of salary increase which occurred, their critics also, those who say that these kind of salary increase brought much disparity in India, that rich they got rich and the poor they became poor. So this was another aspect which could be seen, but we also cannot neglect this fact that there were so many people, those who benefited from these kind of reforms as well. So this kind of distinction could be made between the people, those who benefited from the reforms, and the people, those who lost in the long run. And then at the same time, the kind of participation, more and more participation of women in the public life or could be seen during this particular period, that more and more women, they joined the film industry, not only as heroines, but at the same time in various aspects of filmmaking, not only as directors, not only as producers, but also as script writers and in other aspects of filmmaking. And how there was a change in the mindset of the people, how audience was appreciating this kind of cinema, because this kind of cinema could not only be made unless you have audience for it. So in this context, what we see is that there was an audience now especially after 1990s, which was ready to see this kind of cinema. They were not afraid to experiment in the context that they were ready to see this kind of films which were made during this particular period. At the same time, what we see is that there was change in the women's portrayal as well during this particular period. You can see the slide as well, that in this particular period, urban empowerment of women is reflected in films, and in many films female protagonist is playing a far stellar role. Many of the female centric films or women centric films, they are being made during this particular period, and women, they have entered this business with a refreshingly or a diverse kind of thinking, in which new kind of films which are dealing with women, they have been made. One of the examples which I would like to talk about is English Winglish, made by Gauri Shinde, in which women is looking for her identity. She is a homemaker. She is in a way not appreciated by her husband because she does not know English, and this way how she goes to a different country where she learns English and tries to bring a kind of change within her personality. So the question is not about learning English or not learning English. The question is how she is being viewed by her family, her children as well as her husband, and how she is making an effort to change herself. So the question is not in that she has to change herself so that there is a kind of change within the perspective of her husband or the family, but the question is how she sees herself. So the film deals with a kind of transformation within the life of that particular woman. So this is an important film in this context. And Kahani, another film which I have already talked about, a women-centric film which was made, in which Vidya Balan, she acted. Then some of the films during this particular period were the animation films. Many of the animation films which were made for children, they became quite popular during this particular period. The animation was largely on mythological themes like Krishna, Ganesh, Mahabharata and Ramayana. All these kind of stories which are known to the children when they are talked about by their grandparents, or even if they read certain comics, or if they are engaged in some kind of religious experiences, or these kind of stories, they also attract the kind of magic which is there, the kind of changes, that kind of transformation which is there. They are able to attract the children. And multiplexes, they also helped in targeting of in the target audience of these films, because the kind of changes which came within the family itself, that the family became more nuclear, where only the people, those who had to migrate to other cities for work, they are living in nuclear families, and the disintegration of the joint families, where children and the parents, they are generally living as a family, and where you have only one child or two children, and the focus of the parents is on children's welfare, children's upbringing. So they are too much obsessed with the upkeep of the child, and the preferences of the child, they also dominate within the family. Children, they tell the parents that these are the brands which are to be purchased in terms of various products, be it television, be it laptops, be it mobile phones, because they are more conversant with the technology. And parents, they are also paying a lot of attention to the demands which are being made by the children. So children, they are being taken to the multiplexes so that they can see these films, and children, they become some sort of consumers of these animation films, and not only these animation films but other films as well. And how television as well as cinema, they are able to influence the minds of the children, because the kind of consumerist tendencies which are being exhibited on television, and how children with the various kind of advertisements on the television, how they get influenced, and how at the same time they are able to influence their parents, and in turn they become the decision makers within the family. Now we will talk about the kind of changes which came in the production. What we see is that there is a decrease in the cost of production stage for films. The cost of the production in the film, there was a decrease because the costs, they were being cut. So they could only be cut when there is a fixed schedule for the films. When you make a fixed schedule, when you have a bound script with you, when you have finalized the kind of shooting locations, you have booked the shooting locations in advance. At the same time, you have finalized the cast, you have taken their dates. So all things before the shooting, they have been finalized, they have been arrived at, so that when the shooting begins, the shooting ends at a particular time within a schedule. So these kind of changes, they came in the production. So what we see is that a number of well organized film factories, they were started. Film factories in the context that they were some sort of studios, they were being organized, they were started, and they had 5 to 10 films at hand. They were not producing only one film, rather they were producing 5 to 10 films at one go, and all films, they were with different budgets and different star cast and different locations, and they were shot on fixed schedules, and many of them, they had unfamiliar script writers and directors, new talented people. What we see is that especially after 1991 and thereafter, a number of film directors, young film directors, those who have made good films, those who have not been successful only at the box office, but at the same time they have been appreciated by the critics as well. For example, Dibakar Banerjee or Anurag Kashyap or Anurag Basu, for example, these are the people, those who have been appreciated recently, or Ayan Mukherjee, to say Vishal Bharadwaj, Neeraj Pandey. So a new crop of directors, they have come up with their new ideas. Recently I was reading one of the newspapers, Times of India, in which I read that Neeraj Pandey reads 3 to 4 hours newspapers daily, and with that newspapers he is trying to make the script of the film. So this is the kind of change which is coming. We are not trying to copy the Hollywood films or the films of earlier or the films of other countries. Rather, we are trying to focus on our own subject matter. Rather, we are trying to devise our own original scripts. So this is one of the important changes which is coming. At the same time, the borrowing of money by these small production houses, maybe at the low interest rates abroad or from the Indian institutions, is also taking place during this particular period. So when you have a lesser budget, when you have less stock, and you are recycling the sets which are being made for one film, they are recycled for another film. So that way you are cutting the cost for the production, and when the schedules are fixed, so a pre-production preparation is generally being made. And these kind of changes, they were unheard of in the Indian film industry, and it was generally considered that in many of the films they were being shot earlier, they did not have a bound script, they did not have the dialogues, and many a times many of the films which were done by some of the film stars, they were so repetitive in nature that it was joked that many of the scripts were not written, and the film stars might be knowing about the dialogues as well, because film after film they were doing the same stuff. So this was the kind of criticism which was levied against by some of the film critics. Then in terms of examples, in terms of in the context of production, I would like to talk about another film called Sathiya, which was made in 2003, and this film was made in 70 days, and another film called Maqbool, which you can see on the screen, that Maqbool took 50 days to shoot. So in this, what we can see is that both these films, they took less than 6 months from idea to completion, that how they were conceived, how they were written, and then finally how they were shot. So in this way, what we see is that from the economic point of view, financial prudence can be seen, and a number of films, a number of prints, they were being released. And when you are releasing a large number of prints in the film, then you are taking your films to a wider audience. And what was happening in these films, lesser number of prints they were being made. And when you are making lesser number of prints, you are saving cost, because each print they cost around 30,000 to 40,000. So in this way, lesser number of prints they were being taken. And when you have big budget films, in big budget films what we see is that in big budget films you have large number of prints, so that the cost of production also, the cost of production of the film, it also increases. For a smaller film like Mr. and Mrs. Iyer, they were only 25 film prints. But when you see a film like Kante, it had 500 prints. And nowadays what is happening is, many of the big films, they have more than 5,000 prints. So you can very well imagine in that context that the big budgeted films, they have such astounding film prints that the cost of production of these films that increases. Now I would like to talk about television channels, because television channels, they are also paying huge amounts of money to the people, those who are associated to the film industry in terms of broadcasting rights. What we see is that on 26th January, Happy New Year was a film starring Shah Rukh Khan. It was broadcasted. It was a huge budget film which made more than 250-300 crores. The kind of earnings this film had, and this film was released in a very lesser amount of time, so that it also fetched a high price in terms of TV broadcasting, because the Indian middle class is the principal consumer for these kind of entertainment medias. So, and when Indian middle class is engaged in watching these kind of films or film based programs on television channels, so television channels are also paying huge amounts of money. And sometimes what happens that television channels, even before the release of the films, they tie up with the film producers, that they buy the broadcasting rights of these films even before the release of the films. So in this way, the films, they are able to recover their cost, because the kind of money which they invest during this particular period, they sell the promotional rights for the music, they sell the promotional rights for the various merchandise which are made on the films on which they are based. For example, Krish was a film which became quite popular. Krish 3 was another film which became quite popular. Then Koi Mil Gaya, which was quite popular, which was some sort of a Superman series in the Indian context, because we did not have such kind of films earlier. And the masks of these films, they became quite popular. Hrithik Roshan, a lot of merchandise that was launched, which was associated with the film, not only in the context of masks, t-shirts and other kinds of products which were for the consumers. So in that way, the flourishing international market is also very enthusiastic about the films which are dealing with the middle class subject matter, because Indian middle class is also a very huge consumer of such kind of films which are being made. Then what we see is that the various television channels like Channel 9 Entertainment, they have also produced and distributed various films like American Desi and Freaky Chakra. And they are able to recover 70% of their cost from the overseas and satellite rights. There was, in the context of another example, I would like to talk about a film called Makdi, which was made by Vishal Bharadwaj, and Percept sold the TV rights of this film to Zee, and it was able to recover the 30% of the cost of the film by selling the rights of these films. Some of the other factors which are very, very relevant and which are in a way some sort of favorable, which play an important role, is the favorable government policies, that how the government policies, they in form of benefits for the export industry, the kind of soaps which are being given by the government in the context of the tax cut for the multiplexes, that how for the initial period what we see is that a number of texts, they were being cut for the multiplexes, so that more and more multiplexes they could be built across the country. And how the rationalization of the tax structure, it also takes place from the various stages, from the production to the exhibition stage. And this has exponentially, in a way, increased the growth of such kind of industry, as we see that in 1990s and thereafter there was in a way more and more multiplexes they were being built during this particular period. At the same time, what we see is that the film space for advertisement in the form of brand placement, what we see is that many of the films, various brands or products, they are being placed, and VHS, VCD, DVD copyrights, they are also being sold. So the kind of window space, or the kind of space which is there in terms of release of the film and the release of the VCD and the DVD is also getting less and less. For example, a film is released at a particular point of time, so within 15 days or 20 days, by the time film will be able to recover some money, VCD and DVDs are also launched. So that way filmmakers are able to regain, they are able to achieve some kind of money by selling these kind of rights. So the home video rights, they combine the VHS, they combine the VCD and DVD, and what we have seen is that from 5% to 7% of the overall revenue has been achieved by selling these rights. So this kind of attractiveness is growing with the gap between the film's theatrical release, how the film is released in the theater, and how the film is released on the VCD and DVD. So this is coming to an average of 3 to 4 weeks generally, and from that perspective they are able to minimize their losses and increase their revenue. Another important aspect which is associated is the question of piracy of the films. What we see is that a number of films, they are being pirated. This is a big problem for the filmmakers, because when piracy is taking at such a huge scale, it is being argued that piracy is not only taking place when the film is released, but piracy is taking place before that also, that before the release of the film, the films, they are being pirated and they are being sent to India, because the piracy is taking place not in India but other part of the world where the film, it is being sent to India. So this aspect we will talk tomorrow. Piracy, I have initiated this aspect, and this aspect will be discussed in detail when we continue our discussion tomorrow. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you so much, sir, for the very interesting lecture and talking to us about the various aspects and ideas that figure within the idea of Hindi cinema and globalization. And friends, as sir mentioned, he shall talk more in detail about this, taking this further, talking about piracy and various other issues. So with this, we thank sir for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for coming, and thank you friends for watching. Have a great day.